Hey, welcome back, everybody, to a new edition of Veteran Nation. We're having some technical issues. We'd started the show, and apparently it did not go live, even though it gave us the countdown. So I apologize for that. Uh, we should be seeing everybody's all of their chats. Okay, I'm seeing we're getting some in there. All right, so we are working. Things are definitely working for us. So I apologize for that.
And yeah, just so I'm going to head Georgie off at the pass. So I am not the cause of the delay today.
Gentlemen, this will not do. We're not crabs in a bucket throwing each other under the bus.
And with that, I want to welcome. So my camera, for some reason, is not working. Everything is going wrong today, but whatever, we'll figure it out.
I think that's the one positive,
right? But I do want to welcome to the show. You guys know TC, my excellent co-host, and our sometimes co-host Kahanu, Veterans Affair. Welcome, and welcome to the show, Dr. Kevin.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Yeah, so you say that now. Wait till we get going.
Very true. You do a live show, things just kind of happen.
I had, if it makes you feel any better, my entire live stream this morning on my channel was delay after delay after delay, and I'm trying to tell a serious story and with a serious guest on, and I was like, okay, it's so embarrassing.
I hate it when these things go wrong, especially when I've done everything right. Sometimes I screw up and it's my fault, and I'll take that. But when it's something that's like, why is this not working? It just gets very frustrating.
Oh yeah, I was terribly, terribly frustrated. I was very, very upset. And I'm like, what the?
You still maintained the steady hand. It's not like you were like the Incredible Hulk about it or anything, Yeah, it's like that pilot thing when you hear those black box recordings. If you're one that likes to listen to those in order to relax, you're like, engine 1's out, engine 2, and oh shit.
All right, I've got the stream shared, so people are going to start finding us. I'm seeing them; they're trickling in. Let's welcome everyone. We've got Lou Skunt, Joan, Nancy, Robert, Paul, Georgie, Tommy Karate, Mismatch Mess. Thank you all for being here. We'll try to greet the rest of you all, but we're going to get into some serious discussions today because Dr. Kevin, you're actually a doctor. You're not just like, someone who's like, oh, I've been through the school of hard knocks and I'm going to call myself a doctor.
Right. No. I once upon a time captain in the Marine Corps like yourself, and then I got out and got my doctorate in clinical psychology.
Clinical psychology. He's not like a theology doctor like Jill Biden, like a real doctor.
Right. Yeah. Undergrad in biology. And I think it annoyed, like in my last gig heading up the Wounded Warrior Detachment out here, Colonel Martin was the commanding officer, and he would introduce me and he'd be like, yeah, this is Captain Kieran. He's my analytical one. So, guilty.
TC, you know what's good about him? Yeah, TC, do you know what's great about having Dr. Kevin here?
I have all sorts of things I'd like to say, but I'm just going to go ahead and let you bust on yourself.
He can actually diagnose me.
Not wrong.
Everybody's able to diagnose you. We all know what's wrong with you.
Right. I do feel like I owe you an apology, TC, because you and I have spoken since my last gig when I was a researcher for Louder with Crowder, and I wasn't able to put everything that you would put forward, which was good stuff, right into the pipeline because my boss at the time he's a particular brand of coffee, but it wasn't that I didn't enjoy what you were offering. It's just,
oh,
Stephen,
you don't have to apologize. You don't have to apologize to me for that. This is not directed at you, Dr. Kevin.
was like, oh, I'm gonna get to TC. So,
My story does not appeal to a lot of platforms that would consider themselves,
Reputable.
you know what? My story doesn't. A lot of the stories that I cover don't, whether it's mine personally, or I think we were talking about the testimony issue and that with how law enforcement and whatnot around the case I was
right.
involved in.
That was an interesting case.
It,
from what I remember.
it doesn't appeal to platforms that consider themselves patriotic, law and order, conservative shows.
Yeah.
Because it puts them in a really awkward position of having to ask hard questions about something that kind of falls into the camp of, well, this is a conservative position to be in favor of this particular thing, and if I begin to challenge that, then I might lose some street cred or credibility with my audience. And I've noticed that in my own life. The people who digest my content are not the same now as they were in 2020 when I was first out there. And
Sure.
Everybody now, Skipper and I've joked about this, and well, AVA as well. I haven't changed since 2020. It's just I don't talk about things exactly the way they want me to talk about it. And so I've lost a good chunk of people who loved my content when I was speaking out against all the leftist lockdowns. But
He's turned off his audience.
Hey, my girl.
So no, I appreciate you bringing it up, but no.
You know what's funny about that is when I was writing for other publications, because I've written for a couple publications, and I've done interviews that I've had editors, even though they were good stories, refuse to take them and publish them. And then the people who I interviewed get pissed off at me, and it's like, I don't make the editorial decision. I wrote the article.
Right.
In one case, I wrote one 7 times because every time I would take it to the editor, he'd be like, no, I would rather it say something like this. And I'd go back and I'd write it and turn it back in. Well, no, now I want it to say this. And it was like, it changed every single time. And pretty much he should have just said, no, I don't want you to do the interview. I don't want you to do the story.
Yeah, and I can't begrudge, a man who's made a platform like that from his instinct for what the audience would like to see from him.
Oh, absolutely.
And that was always kind of the thing in the mornings. We would come in at 5 and be searching the interwebs for a show that goes live at 9 in Texas. And it was that mad rush of, okay, what are we doing? And then Steven comes in, and then we got to make sure. And then, and so many of my stories just died on the cutting room floor. It was like the first 28 minutes of Saving Private Ryan every morning.
I wish people understood that. Like, yeah, there for everything that gets published, there's so much that just gets cut or put off to another day, and some things just continually get put off and put off and put off. And
you should try being your own. You should try being your own script writer. And I don't write script, but your own script writer, your own show producer, your own craft services, as well as your own editor and editorial controller, and then having to cut your own content and tell you yourself that you don't like the direction this is going and we're not going to do it, and then have to argue
and how you don't become sight blind to your own writings and material at that point. Like when I was muddling through the dissertation process, it's like I've been looking at this.
I remember you were working on your dissertation at the time too.
I was wrapping that up, and I got to the point where I was actually having to have the Microsoft text-to-speech thing read it to me, because there would be things that I wouldn't catch if I was just reading it, because I'd read it so many times. But you could hear an error sometimes easier than you could read it if it's the 100th time seeing it.
So
absolutely.
One thing I was taught by one of my professors was when you edit your stuff, rewrite it, but then also read it backwards. Start from, and because you're taking your brain out of where it fills in the gaps, and now putting it into, now everything's going to jump out at you.
Yeah. It just speaking of conservative content, when I submitted my first draft of my dissertation, this is at a university down in San Diego, and one of the committee members was like, "This reads like a conservative blog post." And I was just like,
Did you say thank you?
I don't know, guess somebody has a problem with the truth, or you know, but no, it was good that she hacked away at it. So,
And now you're working on the military base,
Mhm.
diagnosing Marines, which has got to be very busy.
Well, yeah,
Really, it's probably. Can't you just like do mass diagnosis?
Red O's in a candy bowl.
yeah. The first diagnosis would be something to the effect it's not really a diagnosis, but it's like, you do remember the part where you joined a warrior cult, right? Like,
I'm diagnosing all of 3rd LAR with narcissistic disorders.
well, yeah.
You know, it's funny you say that because I was just talking to Mrs. TC the other day, and then actually another friend, Kevin, actually, and we were having kind of we weren't conversing at the same time, but the conversations were the same, and Skipper will verify this, and I'm sure Kevin will too. There's something in particular that not even inherent to anybody who joins the Marines, but there's something inherent about Marines that once they've gone to boot and then gone on to this, schooling, done their time, whether it's a 4-year stint or longer or career or whatever, that for a lot of them, being a Marine is their entire identity for the rest of their life. Everything is gauged in, I am a Marine. And I understand it's a brotherhood. Like I wasn't just airborne, but I talk about my time with the 82nd far more than I do anything else.
Mhm.
So I understand that to a degree, but for Marines, it's an obsession. It's like it is
Right.
it's like so what do you do? I'm a Marine. Dude, we're at work right now at the Mayo Clinic. No, I'm a Marine. I'm like, no, like literally, dude, you're like pushing patients around in you are a patient escort. I'm a Marine.
You're not wrong.
Make them write it down. I are a Marine, and the letters I and R.
Well, even if you were ever filling out something that required that you put your occupation down out in the civilian sector, it didn't matter if you were the CO of 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, or the guy that newly dropped from MOS school into the same. You put all caps Marine when it asks for your occupation, and that's it. That's what you do.
You talk like a fag, and your shit's all retarded.
What was the line from Car Wash? More men than you'll ever be, and more women than you'll ever get.
And it's admirable when it's that dedicated while you're in service. Just at some point it becomes, guys, seriously.
Oh yeah. Well, and the guys that when it is the thing that is the capstone event of their life, like yay. Well, but if I push on the idea for a second, it's like, well, if they didn't even have that, then what would it be? What would be the high watermark of their whole time on this rock?
It's Al Bundyism wrapped up in a military field is what it is. Still clinging to that one time he ran in for that touchdown in that one game, and that's all he had for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And it's. But then again, you run into a lot of people in the other branches that are not a lot, but a decent amount in other branches that are the same way, and it's I think you're clinging to something, and I think a lot of times it just stems from you're missing fulfillment in some other aspect of your life, and well, we were having a conversation in somebody's Discord server yesterday, and I had mentioned, and I know AVA well enough and Skipper well enough. It almost bothers a decent number of us, and especially, and Kevin, you can answer or respond how you feel about it. When people go, "Hey, thanks, you guys are heroes," and I'm like, no, I'm not a hero. And Skipper and I have talked about this a lot, and so has AVA. I don't think any of the three of us see ourselves as heroes, no matter where we were or where we served, in combat, out of
Speak
combat.
for yourself.
There's the Marine.
I don't know what the hell you're talking about. No.
So there I was.
10,000 feet in the air. No, but I think I get what you're saying. And I think the way that I've resolved a portion of that when that happens is that it's just kind of a social convention. It's almost like good morning or hey, how you doing? It's just like, oh, I've learned that you're a veteran, so here's what I think I say, or I've come across this person in the morning and here's what I think I say. Good morning.
Yes.
And you muddle through it and you're like, yeah, hey. And that's it. Because it's just, I think, a little bit of social signaling, but
It's like I picked the wrong week to quit amphetamines.
yeah, the grand ovations, it's like, I don't know, in my time, I didn't have anybody shoot rounds at me in anger directly. So it's hard to know how heroic one is.
I see we're getting some questions from the audience.
You ever seen a grown man naked?
So Georgie, my bestie, she asked, does Kevin do online virtual therapy or is it only for veterans?
In my capacity right now, because I'm a graduate psychologist, but I'm pursuing licensure, I do not have a telehealth practice or online practice presently. That's probably the short answer to the question. What I do right now is in service of Marine Corps Community Services in the community counseling program. It's kind of an in-betweener on the continuum of pathology. The way I might explain it to somebody who's come in is I don't technically diagnose in this role, and I will probably work with them for somewhere between 12 sessions. I think the longest client I had was about 20. But if it's something that takes longer than that to resolve, I probably should have referred to a higher level of care. And then, they wouldn't like to hear me say, oh, below us, but below us are the military family life counselors. And their thing is they don't diagnose, and they also don't write notes, which I think is good if we're trying to have something where people can overcome their stigma to talk at all. It's like, well, there's literally no record of anything you said, and you can come back next week if you want, and I think that's a good start for those that are at that level. But if somebody's trying to target something specific, then yeah, like let's have something we're aiming at, and let's talk about how close or far you got from it this week to week. Long answer to your short question, but I'm prone to that.
No, we're not homosexual, but we are willing to learn.
Somebody, AVA, you were under explicit command directions to get to Skipper's location, perform an extraction on that soundboard, and you have failed, sir. You have failed.
Oh, man. I'll figure it out. I'll get it done.
Yankee Bell said something interesting. She said, Skipper, I just don't know if you can see it there, but
Yeah, I got it.
I appreciate the sentiment. I don't know how the others feel about this, but I don't even know that the military in its capacity really I'm going to try and leave the philosophical aspects of it aside, but I'm going to just speak to the reality. I don't know that the military in its capacity, at least since the end of World War II, can really be seen as the backbone either of the country. I think the backbone of the country are the men and women who go out every day and work in the private and the public sector.
Blessed are the
Yeah, blessed are the cheesemakers.
Or in this case, blessed are the taxpayers. Like that's what
Why-
makes this whole
But why
thing.
just the cheesemakers? What about all producers of dairy products in general?
Who's gonna inherit the earth? The Greek.
Right. Who had
But-
the over-under on how long
but I-
Python reference came out?
But I think there's a reality in which, like, nobody wants to be approached, cops or military, and be reminded that, hey, I pay your salary. And law enforcement in particular, individuals have developed some pretty unique responses of, well, can I get a raise then? Nobody wants to be approached with that response or that accusation. I pay your salary. But I do think, Skipper, coined the phrase, thank you for being worth serving, which is what we sign off every episode of Vet Nation Live with.
I like that. I like that a lot.
That you guys are the backbone, the civilian populace that makes it possible for us to have, and there again, philosophy aside, being able to have a standing military, whether the founders wanted it or not, that can reach out into the world and hopefully only go out and stop threats directly to the United States homeland. You guys are the ones that make it possible, and there's far more of you than there are of us. And most of us have served in situations where we're surrounded by people who don't always remember that. There are a lot of hero complexes and superiority complexes in people in the military. They do think they're special. And some of those guys need a good blanket party once in a while.
If I can push just on that idea, two of the ideas, like, well, first, I don't think you should have any shame in bringing philosophy into a conversation unless you're talking to people that will roll their eyes when you do so, because if it's not grounded in some sense of reality, then what was the philosophy in the first place? It's wholly unnecessary in that case. But
hey,
also,
where are the white women at?
with the idea of the superiority complex of those in the military, I do think it's also, like, just from the doctoral program that I was in, when there was like the same kind of it's full of it was like me and my buddy who leaned conservative, and like my politics were like, hey, let Adam and Steve Marion defend their house with guns. Like that's as overt as I was while I was
on shrooms
in the program. And even that was considered, like alt-right, far right. It's like, what? Oh, just because the guns thing? Oh, okay. And there was this casual disregard for people in the military and their intelligence. There was an assumption that they were of below average intelligence just by dint of the fact that they're in the military. And I know that that's a subset in academia that I was surrounded by, that they're used to being the smarter people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
But I was often one who, so like, yes, there's definitely superiority complexes in the military. There's also superiority complexes in the civilian sector. What I would invite civilians to recall in those things is, look, you have to remember your left half of the bell curve of human IQ that also includes the people who cannot get into the military.
Yeah.
And they're on your team too. Like, it's not just right.
And a lot of people confuse education with intelligence. There was a
Yes.
famous thing where they did on the internet, it's gone viral, where they had people, they were trying to guess who had the highest IQ, and they started rating them.
No, that was a great one.
And the military intel guy
Yeah.
was by far
He
the
was like,
smartest,
okay,
but they all rated him the dumbest.
Right. They all rated him the dumbest. He was, I think, a Lance Corporal,
Mhm.
didn't look wholly different from you or I. White skin, blue eyes,
Well, and this has actually been a studied thing. People who are acknowledged as professionals in their field tend to also think they're professionals in every other field.
Oh, yes. No, I run into that with medical doctors a lot. Like, I play nice with medical doctors. My undergrad was in biology, but there is that instinct, I would say, among lawyers are not immune to this either. I'm an expert in this, and therefore I'm an expert in all.
Yeah. But I think, and I'm sorry, guys, I'm going to talk from a officer standpoint here. I think as a military officer, we've all gotten humbled by an enlisted man at least once.
Oh yeah.
A guy who just looked at something and was like, "Oh yeah, it's this," because he had plenty of experience, just not a lot of education. And we come in as the officer thinking we know it all, and just be made to look a fool of by this, career Marine.
Oh yeah. Well, and I had a brief time as enlisted because I enlisted when I was in college. So in summer of '97, that's when I was on the Yellow Footprints in San Diego. And then the summer of '98, I was at officer candidate school. So for the first year in the Marine Corps, it was just like, welcome to the Marine Corps, Kevin, and yay for that, But if you haven't been humbled at least once by, one of the guys that works for you who can either kick your ass or knows more about his weapon system than you, or supply chain logistics, then you've not been in there learning that he can do that well enough, and therefore bad officer.
AVA, you need to shut up.
I know he's thinking about something over there.
I am.
He's trying to make a plan to execute the extraction of that damn soundboard.
I'm just trying to figure out how I'm gonna low crawl in there and just disconnect it.
No, we need it gone.
No, I'm just
I just walked right in today.
taking the information that Dr. Kevin's putting out. I'm not an officer, so I can't speak from that standpoint.
No, and I didn't make it to.
Definitely one of those guys that I had the experience over the knowledge, and I worked on helicopters, and a lot of people thought just because of the way I look, I'm not too smart. Then again,
No, but if you worked on helicopters, then
Right?
that's a lot of moving parts, man.
It's a lot of things that can go wrong.
all of which have to work. Yeah.
Right. I just I know we're going to get to it, but my mind is more focused on the VA side of veteran care.
Yeah, say more.
Yeah. Ask any questions.
Do you see yourself working for the VA?
I did for a year. That was my internship while I was in my doctoral program, was at the Alexandria VA in Louisiana, kind of right there in the ankle of the boot, so to speak.
So
And-
I'm sure that you know about that book, Body Keeps the Score.
I know of it. I haven't read it.
So I forgot the guy's name, but he coined the term PTSD at the VA.
Mm.
I tried reaching out to him personally, but in my opinion, the guy, his entire, the thing that he built there at the VA was completely destroyed to help veterans. But if you haven't read the book, then I don't know how to really explain it very much. But
Sure.
during
Well-
the time, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, man.
No. Please lay out the idea that you'd like to kick around.
So I wanted to get your opinion on mental health in the VA
Sure.
with veterans. Do you guys have a set? How do I say this? Are there key words that you guys look for to lock us down?
When you say lock us down, do you mean like send you to inpatient, or just to
Yeah.
try and understand
You're
what
right.
you're seeing,
Pretty
or-
vague. Like report us to the behavior committee, get panicked and write something inside of our notes.
No. Now, I am not the arbiter of the VA, and it was interesting when I showed up. There was a very common expression that says, if you've been to one VA, you've been to one VA. And I think the distilled idea there is that there's actually quite, it's almost like police departments across America. There's central guiding things that you can't do as any kind of police department, but there can actually be a fair amount of local control. This is not a perfect analogy. But so I can speak to the way that they were doing it at that VA. It was a smaller facility. They had a PTSD clinic, and that place was kind of regarded as like a sacred temple, almost, was the energy. And in fact, I remember very, very vividly, there was a time when VA administrators had come through to like, oh, and this is our PTSD clinic. And I remember Dr. Kelly Pierce, he kind of radiated a lot of positive dad energy in the PTSD clinic, so to speak. And he chased them out of here and he ran it up the chain like, how dare you come in here? We have people who had to convince themselves to come because they can't stand being in anyone's presence they don't know. And then they finally muster it up, and you guys come barging in here like this. You're out of your mind, you know.
Mhm.
And I really liked that he did that. And so when it came to my experience there, it was very, in my opinion, warm and welcoming, you know, but I'm not the arbiter of what the individual experienced as they arrived.
Mhm.
I was fortunate enough to run groups while I was in the PTSD clinic, you know, and it was, you know, like you've had your experiences with the V, but I do know that my approach seemed to go okay because, you know, like this was a group of Vietnam era guys. They'd been a cohort for a long time. And I had watched my intern who I was tagging out with. She was a Navy veteran, and she like was trying to be like the alpha in the room, and you know these things. And I'm sitting there as like former college linebacker, plenty of time on a mat, and I'm thinking I could throw you through a fucking wall. You're not going to do that with these gentlemen, you know. And so when it was my turn, you know, because she walked me into the conversation, you know, I was like, so, gentlemen, how many?
Would you like to know the probability of her using it against you?
Right, if she ever sees this. But I was like, how many interns have you guys been through at this point? And I remember one guy with a cowboy hat was like, 4. And I was like, well, you guys must be pretty good at it by now. You know? And it just kind of set the tone that more than one, because I wasn't trying to wrestle for the stick, they knew that I was temporary. I was like, I'm just here trying to offer something if I can, you know, and we'll see if I can. That seemed to be the correct enough approach that individuals from that group sought me out. They were like, hey, I'm thinking about maybe coming to talk to you about my PTSD. And I was like, that's great, you know.
Mhm.
And I was never looking for a buzzword to then indict them. But now that I've kind of talked it through, I would say I'm sensitive to what, I don't know whether we call it malingering or things like that. But when there are things that are like overstated,
Mhm.
so, you know, case in point, I remember this one client struggling with addiction, and that I'm convinced that was his primary problem,
Mhm.
you know, and he was claiming that he had PTSD because he had served as a reservist capacity for funeral details.
Mhm.
And I'm not talking about when guys were getting blown up and then packed on in Landstuhl and then arriving, you know, in the East Coast here. I mean, like after they'd been, you know, in their dress uniform, it's an open casket and then they close it or something like that. And he's just like part of the detail.
Yeah, I've done that.
And he's saying like, oh, and you know, I remember the eyes. And I was like, okay, what color were they? You know, because you get a sense when
Blue.
somebody's
No. Ah!
it's called episodic memory. Like when somebody's telling you their story,
Yeah.
and if it's a vivid one, they're watching the movie of their life as they tell you about it.
Yeah.
And usually they can hit rewind or pause and kind of go back to moments. But if it's not episodic memory, then it's probably a narrative that they've practiced so that they can then tell you about it. And then if you just probe a little bit for things that would be in the movie.
So recently we've been talking a lot about stolen valor, and I've had stolen valor groups come after me for some reason. I don't even know why. The record's out there. But I had a gunny that I worked for who was very big on searching down stolen valor. And when they claim PTSD, it's always the Hollywood, oh, I've got flashbacks and yeah, this, but it's never the things that really like are across the board with PTSD. Like everyone I know with PTSD, I'm like, what's the worst thing? And they're like, the insomnia, like hands down, not being able to sleep. Like every single one. But with those guys, that's never what they bring up.
Yeah, you know, and it feels like a real success story the guy, there was a young Marine this last year. He's not a client anymore. But one of the great joys in the work that I do is, it's your average Marine that had something undeniably horrible happen to him. And when they're just having problems and they can't fully articulate why or what they think happened, to help somebody go from where they think therapy is fake and gay and PTSD is bullshit to, oh, I have a problem. There's actually a name for it. This guy that I don't think is insane helped me come to that conclusion. And now I feel in position to pursue that when I get out through the VA. And it's like, that's great, man. Like, good.
Well, in mental health over here at my VA, the problem that I run into is them constantly changing the doctors. Like, you have to continually over and over tell your story.
Yeah. I certainly empathize with that, because it takes a lot to unzip your stuff and then lay it out there, and then, oh, you believe me enough, but you're not the person I'm going to work with. I think that's why I tend to go at the hardest stuff first. Like when I do a screening, I do try and prepare people for that, because I'll just be like, hey, this is a screening, and I may or may not be the guy that you work with eventually. We're just trying to figure out if this is the right level of care first, because if you go through this for a whole hour and then I'm like, okay, well, it turns out you should be with Oscar team and not me, you probably feel like you've wasted your fucking time. Yeah.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah. So I try to be as empathetic as possible to that. Be like, hey, yeah, turns out I'm not the guy. Here's what you can expect over there. This is the person that you'll meet. And at least that warm handoff, I don't like sending people to people I have not met and spoken with at least once offline ever. So I don't know you. Stranger danger. So
yeah, with so many veterans that have reached out to me through the show, one thing I've discovered is they have to be ready to work on whatever they're doing. Sometimes they reach out because they just want to ask questions.
Yeah.
But they're not ready yet.
Yeah.
You just got to be patient.
No, and I think that's, well, because veterans are human, and that's like, I didn't just like sprout from the ground of the VA. Like I did a lot of therapy with civilians before I was able to score those gigs, so to speak. And yes, it's none of it's going to move any faster than the person is comfortable going.
Yeah.
And I think those might have been early mistakes as like young clinician Kevin Kieran, who's like newly trained and very motivated. And look, just, you remember the statue, the Follow Me statue out in front of, officer candidate school. And it's just like, if you just go in this direction that I know we need to go, you'll do better. And no, like they'll put this much on the table to risk, because that's the amount they've learned they can risk without dying in other corners of their life.
Very true.
And it's just one piece of their life. So yeah.
See, now that we're actually talking about people getting help, TC's like, yeah, I've got want no part of this conversation.
Well, I just figured this is probably some sort of move towards actual therapy for both you and AVA, and I just don't want to stand in the way of your wellness.
Hey, here's one thing I'll say about Dr. Kevin. He knows most of my PTSD actually comes from the breakdown of my marriage. And he has actually been around to witness almost all of it with me. And
samesies. Like we've watched each other's marriages dissolve over time.
I just never thought I'd be in a place in my life where I'd hear a clinical psychologist use the phrase samesies.
Well, stick around. Right. No.
Highly disappointed.
I have another thing I wanted to run by Dr. Kevin, is that my experience with mental health at the VA compared to mental health in community care with civilian care is that when I go VA, it feels like I'm in another war. But when I'm talking to civilian doctors, it sounds like they're my friend. I don't know why it's like that, but it feels safer outside of the VA.
They're all gonna laugh at you.
I'm sorry that that's your experience. It makes me want to ask. This is global outside of just mental health. This means like all doctoral interfaces that you're having in both settings. On the civilian community level care side, there's maybe like is it a believability thing? Like you feel more believed and like, oh, let me just take care of you. And yes,
No, it's more of like the docs at the VA are just okay, good for you. But the doctors in the civilian care are like, no shit. Let's dive into that right there instead of let's get everything and try to get it done in one day.
Well, I think when you're dealing with the VA, you're dealing with you're dealing with a system and less of a care structure in a lot of situations, and I think that ends up hindering. I don't want to say it. It really begins to remove the empathy from people who are enmeshed in the system long enough, and I don't mean the patients or the clientele, but the people working there.
like staff and administration as well.
It's staff and administration, yeah.
Yeah.
The empathy really starts to go out the window because anytime you have a bureaucracy, which anything that the state, and you guys know I use state to describe all government, anytime the state sets something up, it does become a bureaucratic nightmare. And that lack of empathy just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds so that you are no longer, even if it's the first time that you're there, you're not a person, you're a number, you're really kind of a product or a raw material that's there to be processed and molded. And so you just kind of get it, and that becomes a malignancy after a while.
Yeah.
And there again, that doesn't necessarily mean every VA clinic, but
no, but it's a lot. I don't want to cut you off. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I think what we're also kind of talking about, it's reminding me of some literature when they became interested in caregiver burnout. And they're like, oh, what is burning out clinicians? Why doesn't anybody want to keep working for the Veterans Administration? And they were thinking that they needed to put in all these programs so that the caregiver can talk about and process what it means for the individual, deal with people across time that are talking about the worst things that's ever happened to them and without becoming callous or something like that. Nope. Turned out the source of burnout was fucking paperwork.
Right.
Like the number of steps that you have to do. If you screw something up, it takes an act of Congress to turn it around, and that it becomes like this administrative state that I think you're speaking to, where, God help anyone that starts to see somebody as like oh my God, if they say this, then that means 4 more hours of work. That isn't even related directly to their care. It's related to like insurance and billing, and things like that. And so it's not like I don't like I could see over a long time becoming exactly what they are in those same conditions. But what can we do to ameliorate it? Because one of the problems with administration is that they can always tack one more good idea onto the obligatory use of calories in the list of things that must be done. And I always I feel like I was one of the few people that was, so when I'm like, there I am, a lowly intern, and they're having like an all hands staff meeting, and they're showing this 200 measures that they want to get better at across the whole VA, from the customer service, the client care, the time it takes to get an appointment, all these things. And Marine, but I also have like a stage background, there in the distal past. And so I wasn't afraid of getting up in front of like the entire VA and talking to the head of that VA and being like, sir, Captain Keyran, blah, blah, blah. It's too much.
Mhm.
Pick 3 things you want this VA to get better at
Right.
and watch us all deliver those to you. But saying, oh, just make the VA better across all these 250 measures, like that's not how the human brain works.
Yeah.
You
Well,
need
that's-
focus.
That's what I've consistently said is the problem of the VA. It's trying to do everything.
right.
Like the VA does home loans. HUD does home loans. The VA does the GI Bill. Well, you have the Department of Education that does Pell Grants. Why is the VA doing all of these facets that other parts of government do? Just hand it off to them and be our advocate.
Yeah.
That's all I ask for. But yet they're like, oh, we need to do this because veterans do this. And it's like, when you try to do everything,
Yeah.
you do everything badly. Try to be good at like 2 or 3 things.
Right. How many times have various governments across the world said, "Oh, centralized control, that'll fix all these things, and we should run all of that." What could go wrong? Tens of millions.
Well, no, you hit on something there. So philosophically, I would say that we'd be better off if the VA was disbanded.
I agree.
And the money that is spent on the VA on buildings and building new buildings and maintaining old buildings and paying off doctors and administrators and whatnot got condensed down into about 10 people whose whole job was to verify people's military career or their time and was responsible for overseeing benefit payouts over care at a clinic so that you're getting a direct deposit into some sort of VA type banking account where you just went and paid for what you needed off of that account, or you submitted that bill for local care, community care, whatever you want to call it, and they just covered it. It'd be so much better because the private sector does everything better. It just does. The private sector does everything better. And when everything's centralized, it just falls apart. It just absolutely falls apart. We have ATL Transparency in the news, who's, I hope that ATL understands that like we cannot just respond to every single comment that's everybody's making. So we're not trying to brush you off.
I might push on that idea that the private sector does everything better. I think it would depend on the amount of time that we're talking about for the private sector to get it right. Because with that freedom comes the freedom to fuck your case up. And
sure,
it's
yeah.
a business and I get to go bankrupt and sorry, you can't walk for forever because I fucked you up. And so it's like, oh, well, then they go out of business, but then what do we have? And so it strikes me as like, it's a fine idea, just like the fine idea of the motto of the VA.
I'm just the idea guy. It's the rest of you need to execute.
Yeah, because like, what do you see on any VA that you walk into? It's like, for he who hath borne the burden and his widow and his orphan, And that's like,
I've never seen that because I've never walked into the VA. So
you should try it sometime.
No, well, I hear a horror story.
Or is this me making a shitty joke because you can't walk? And so
actually, I tell everybody who
thanks a lot. I'm just gonna.
If people who tell me stuff about the VA, I tell them just go and volunteer at a VA. Go and volunteer for a day and let me know what you think.
Yeah. And I'm probably coming across as a huge company man for this organization, and that is certainly not my goal. I can speak well of the clinicians that I had. I can't say, how the hell do you solve a problem of the individual that comes in front of you who deserves compensation because of good and leal service and we broke them, versus, hey, I can make you better, and then you can just like be. Which do you want?
But there are some things I think the VA is ahead of most civilian medicine when it comes to prosthetics. Why? Because we do it so often.
Yeah.
But VA healthcare across the board is very lacking.
Sure, absolutely. No, it's like anything with the government, and I think we could probably all agree that like uh, you would only ever consider it a friend if you're completely out of friends, and you would never want it to be your friend.
I like that analogy.
You know, like
Well, it took the VA 6 years to get me a surgery that I needed. So that shouldn't be the case.
no, I agree. Well, and I don't know that I see the VA so different than various HMOs in that regard.
Right.
As even things within Navy Medicine West, I've locked horns with Navy Medicine West in the past when I was heading up the Wounded Warrior Detachment out here, and I could be a little conflict filial.
Every veteran I know had a problem with TRICARE when they were in.
Yeah.
That they had to. If you were in long enough, you were going to come across those.
Right. Like, no, I had a
SOBs.
guy that he was coming to me because of, this is a former client, but he had a dear friend, fellow Marine that had killed himself. And there was a lot of blame and shame and guilt that he was experiencing about that having happened to this individual, that they were, in the fighting hole together guys, and then also there was a young child involved in his friend's case. And it was, but he also had a severe shoulder injury, and he had a severe shoulder injury in the past. Memory serves, it was a torn labrum. And I know what that is. I know that it's something that doesn't get better with therapy.
Yeah.
Like it needs to be going, and you need to go in and correct it. And the standard course of care is you'll get like, oh, let's try therapy first. And it extends that timeline and maybe even potentially damages you. And I remember like writing a letter to the orthopedic surgeon. It was a guy named Ken. He's moved on now. And he was like, oh, yeah, no, you're right. That would be the standard of care, but why don't you send him my way and get him in? And it's because the administration wouldn't have handled him, but there was this guy, Kevin, that, was willing to like, hey, let's try and get you through this morass.
Yeah, that's the problem with a lot of the VAs, just the red tape.
Yeah.
And that's, I know a lot of people have been coming to me. They're like, your benefits are getting cut because Trump is cutting these jobs. I'm like, no, I don't think so. Simply because I do know that there's a ton of red tape. There is definitely cuts that can be made to the VA that will make it better.
Oh, yeah.
I said, so until you actually can tell me what benefit is being cut, don't come at me with that.
Yeah. No, like when I was at that VA in Louisiana, there were people around me that I was like, I still don't know what you do, and I'm not that dumb. Like, what is it you do? And these are all people that I hope when Doge came through, it was just like swaths of wheat getting cut down, but
we have a question from ATL Transparency News. Do you report these failures of the VA to the IG office as a whistleblower, or do you allow it to continue?
It's a good question. I think that how you report something without breaking confidentiality is you have to err on the side of the client's confidentiality.
Yeah.
And so what I've done is like I work right across the street from the IG. And when something meets criteria, I'm like, hey, do you know where the IG lives and sits? He's right across the street, and here is how you go over there, and here is how you do that. Is that something you might be interested in doing? Because I can't.
Yeah.
I can't say, oh, Lance Corporal Antifrats has this problem, and he's seeing me for that. Boom, you're done. You've broken confidence.
Employees are afraid to say stuff because they don't want to lose their position. I know that for a fact because one woman,
that's always the case.
She tried to help me, and they didn't fire her, but they transferred her all the way down to Long Beach because she opened her mouth about me. So she tried to help me.
Yeah.
So that sucks that the VA has that power to shut people down.
Yeah, there's no shortage of people that in any human endeavor and organization like this that gets this concretized, there's going to be people that are mostly interested in defending the institution.
Oh, and absolutely, we're seeing that right now with Doge and everything throughout the DoD. You know, I've had colleagues who are on base every day, worried about their job, and they're like, you're not worried about all these cuts, and I'm like, first off, no, I'm not, because if my job went away tomorrow, I'd be okay. I know I'll be okay because I've been out there in the civilian world and I was okay. But the other thing is, I'm like, you need to sit back and take some stock right now that everything that's jacked up within the DoD, you have a hand in that. And that's why this is coming, because we've been doing things wrong for so long that whenever someone wants to fix it, it's, well, no, that's just the way we've been doing it. So we're going to stick to this. And it's like, that is the problem.
Right.
And I've told several people, and I actually had a friend who he was a Marine for 30 years, retired colonel, and then he's worked for probably another 25 as a civilian. And he's like, look, I'm secure in my job. They're making it worth my while to stay. They're paying me top dollar. They're letting me travel when I want to travel. I can do whatever I want. He goes, but I am cognizant that with Doge, my job is going away. I am one of the ones with the target. And he goes, and I should have been gone 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But he's like, they just kept wanting me to stick around because, well, you're the one who knows how to do it. Well, the thing is, when you're not willing to find a better way of working, everything's going to eventually break down and you're going to have to pay the piper at some point. And that's why I see what is currently happening across the board in our government, not just the DoD, but
Yeah. No, and like it was only within the last, I think, week and a half that I myself was told, hey, you can stop sending the email of the 5 bullet points because we had to do that every week. But I was happy to do it.
So was I. Yeah.
And the first, and maybe it was just like some hubris, but and I think I just even copied and pasted after week like 2, because it's like, I'm a clinician. Like, I'm just trying to get fewer guys to paint the wall with their gray matter,
right,
than the current number. And if I can help make that number a little bit smaller.
I'm sitting there. I'm like, look, I'm actually eligible to retire right now. So if you want to do away with my job, just sweeten it enough to work to get me out.
Yeah, right. And I will say in the current role, it's not exactly doctoral pay.
Yeah.
It's just, this is a town where I have family and things like that and obligations.
Yeah.
But it's almost like if they're in their ledger and balance, they're like, oh, this clinician, there's too many of these. Let's get rid of this Kevin Kieran guy. Then it's like, well, I guess you're just forcing me to go live and work better somewhere else in the America other than California. Man. Yeah. But my failed state.
What have you in your or not in your practice, but in your work and your studies, have you considered what it would look like to be out in the civilian world, away, not working with work, because you're not in the VA anymore. You're now working directly for the military and Marines. But have you looked at what it would look like for you to go out and get into the world and work exclusively with people out in the private sector, and what kind of focuses do you think you would see yourself having if you were to do that?
Sure. Well, I had the fortune or good fortune of, like, my first practicum location, my first clinical experience was in an anxiety disorder clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And then my next clinical year of experience was at UCSD Moores Cancer Center. I really liked that work. I think some of that is informed by, like, in the raising of a Kevin, there was a lot of death in my family early on. I didn't have any surviving grandparents past like the age of 11. My dad died when I was 20. And so death was just one of those ever-present kind of things. And so I sought out to work at Moore's Cancer Center because it's like, they could probably benefit from somebody that's just okay with the fact of death, but isn't going to make light of it, but isn't also just going to, and I could see, returning to something like that. I think because of I'm very bio-behavioral in how I approach an individual client because of my training in biology and other science and stuff. And so I like anxiety disorders. I think one of my primary clinical and research interests is sleep. My initial dissertation topic involves sleep. I do like helping people with sleep specifically because it's just one of those, it's like the tide that raises or sinks all vessels. 2/3 of the DSM-5 has some kind of sleep indicator in every issue. So if you fix sleep, you fix a lot of their problem.
Yeah. For a lot of the veterans I've had who have had substance issues, most of it was, I'm just trying to get to sleep.
Yeah. And, there's very aggressive strategies that work very well if done forthrightly to help improve people's sleep. There's also a lot of variability in how people sleep. Like, it's interesting to me how, like, at the Middle Ages, it's very common for individuals to go to sleep several hours. Then maybe they woke up for a couple hours, and then they might go back to bed after doing some stuff because their brain's done the things that need to happen during sleep sufficiently. And then now, okay, quiet back down a little bit.
I have narcolepsy, so that's fun.
Narcolepsy? Yeah, I can see. There's a lot that's no longer on the table.
I'm glad you weren't a helicopter pilot.
Oh, God. It's reminding me of a story my dad told me one time. Yeah, and it's one last thing too is, like, you got to be careful as a guy on the wrong side of 40 being like, oh yeah, I actually work really well with kids.
There is one thing I do want to talk about because it affects a lot of veterans in military, and it's one of those things that there's supposed to be all these things out there to help you, but when you actually dig into the resources, they're really not there to help. They're just there to make money, and that's relationships and divorce, because it affects so many military families.
So, yeah, one of the things I didn't think I would like as much as it turns out that I do kind of like is working with couples, because I thought couples therapy was lame when I was in my early studies.
What's your love language?
Well, like, I'm here to treat the relationship, and I'm not on anybody's team, and I'm just like when I meet a couple, my spiel is something to the effect of, hey, so no one's innocent in any of this. It's almost like the Asian model for traffic collisions. like in America, we think somebody can be completely at fault for a traffic collision when it occurs. And like in Japan, it's like, no, you dared to leave your house today. So you're at least 10% at fault at all, And so, my kind of approach is like, look, nobody's innocent in this. And I want it to be like on a sports team where I want to be a fan of you guys. I want to be in the stands with my overpriced beer and hot dog. But one or both players is probably picking up this team, And so, like when I was trying to save my own erstwhile marriage, I developed some pretty strong opinions about what I thought did not work, And so one of the things that I do tend to follow the Gottman literature when I'm treating a couple. I think they do have the best body of evidence-based rationale and theories about what makes.
You're way over my head right now.
Okay, so yeah, John and Julie Gottman, they're I think probably in their 70s and 80s. They've been doing this forever.
I'm imagining the Saturday Night Live. This is my lover.
Right. I like that it was almost like an atheoretical model that they came up with, because they had all the classical training, and these are older folks that had worked for decades and decades in psychology, trying to help couples. And this is borrowed, I think it was from, I had a little bit of their training, and then Jordan Peterson had a lot to say about the Gottmans and their stuff. So some of this is borrowed from him. But then also having trained in their stuff directly, like they basically built bed and breakfasts and then hooked people up to a bunch of lie detector equipment and then just had them be. And we're just going to watch this couple get along and see like what made that person's fight or flight response come online completely, as opposed to having this, oh, well, here's how we think you should talk to each other. They actually were able to sort people out along the lines of what breaks people up. Because, and then they got pretty good at, okay, with 95% accuracy or so, just by looking at these people for a half hour, we can see who's staying together and who's not.
Okay.
And it turns out, oh yeah, people can fight every day and stay together for 40 years. And people can avoid most fights and stay together for 40 years. But if there's a mismatch in those two instincts, now there's good luck. Like if you have one person that's like we need to get to the bottom of this before we go to bed, and the other person's like, I just like kicking cans down the curb, and then we never talk about it. That is a mismatch. So I could go on, but is there another?
Once again, AVA, please shut up. Just stop talking. Just stop.
But and with couples, I actually don't let them talk about their problems for like the first 4 sessions. Like I'll meet with them individually to hear your grievances and what you think is breaking it. I want it outside of the earshot of your partner. And then I'm going to do the same with the other person. And then we're going to go right into some of the technique stuff about how you start a conversation about something that's really hard to talk about. What I'm really not interested in, like, oh yeah, hey, go have the same fucking fight you've always had, but do it in my office. That would be great. No, like I tell them, look, I'm either going to help this relationship or I'm going to help the next one.
That's because one thing I do want to get into is the military and its effect on relationships, because they absolutely inject themselves.
Yeah, say more.
Well, I mean, as you know, with my situation, I was still on active duty. I was ordered to do certain things, and then I found out that, oh yeah, they were talking behind my back, type of thing. But me as the military member, I was expected to toe this line that was, perfect, whereas my spouse was absolutely doing everything under the sun to try to affect me professionally.
Yeah, and I'm very sensitive to rigged games when I come across them, and I do try and sniff that out as I can when I'm working with a couple. I also spend, you develop your things that you find yourself often saying to people time and time again. And one thing I find myself frequently reminding spouses is, this is a warrior cult, not a 9 to 5 or 7:30 to 4 or whatever the hours you think they should be are. And this person will go away at times, and it's not because they're necessarily choosing to. And don't get me wrong, of course, the moment I say that, I'm reminded of like some colonel in my distant past that like wouldn't leave until like 1900 every day because he's just reading stuff. And I'm, as a young lieutenant, going like, yeah, it's not my fucking problem. You don't want to go home to your wife, sir.
Right.
This is my thought bubble, not like what I say. Yeah, it's super. It's that third. I don't think that, especially at the Marine Corps, I can't speak to the other services, but I can't imagine it's completely different. That this is going to be a much larger role, and the lines get blurry between friend and family and job.
And I've seen a lot of military members leave the service simply because their marital relationship was rough, and thinking that, oh, I'm going to get out and things will be better. And it doesn't.
Well, and I've also seen it, the idea of like, oh, I'm going to dedicate this life of mine to this military organization, as opposed to this person that I hope is kind of hanging around when it's either my deathbed or theirs. And it was within this last 3 weeks. One of the individuals I was working with said something, and maybe you've heard this before, but it's like the Marine Corps is a machine. You're the oil.
Yeah.
You keep it working, and it is all too happy to replace you. when it needs to. You're 100% critical for this whole thing running, and it's happy to replace you, and it's not going to hold your hand when you die.
Sure.
You know, years and years from now, hopefully in your dotage. So knowing that, and then somebody picking their life partner over this thing, I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, that being said, I have a lot to say about marriage in America right now, but that's a whole other session.
I'm in on what you said. I never heard like the warrior cult mentality until you started talking about it, and I mean it makes a lot of sense to me. It reminded me of a fight that my wife and I had when I first got back from my first deployment, and we were fighting for the fact that I wanted to hang out with my battle buddies more than her.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand now why that is, and that was that warrior mentality because I wanted to be next to people that kept me alive that whole time. And you know what I mean? I know you know what I mean, but
sure.
that
But
makes
if you expand on that, but
said
Oh
that.
no, I was just gonna jump on that because I know the British do this, and I think it's something that we should be doing. Is at the end of a deployment, the unit shouldn't just come home, go to their families, and go away. I think they actually should deploy somewhere else onto another base and just have a debrief and a time to bring everything down amongst people with those shared experiences.
Yeah.
And before you come back to your family.
Yeah.
I remember yelling at her and telling her that I would rather be with him than with you, and because he's my brother and you're just my wife. I know it was wrong when I said it at that time, but that's just the way I felt.
Well, and when you say you know it was wrong, it sounds like you understand you might have said something that hurt her feelings, but I don't think you were lying. And I don't think you were wrong in your assessment of the situation. And maybe here's why. One of the better models for intimacy I ever heard came from a clinician over in Joshua Tree named John Guayola. And he was an LMFT and a very talented guy, older gentleman, been around. And he described intimacy, and this comes up in every biopsychosocial assessment that I do. I will float this model for it out there because one of the questions on the assessment is like, do you have any issues with intimacy? And it's like, that's so open-ended. And I don't know if when I say intimacy in your head, the word sex comes up or whatever is going on. So let's expand it out a little bit. Because I do see intimacy and sex as things that there's some overlap there, but they're not the same thing. You know, and here's why. Part of the reason that we are friends is that I can say things that I wouldn't want other people to know about me because of the fear that they would start to distance themselves from who is this monster? Who is this asshole? And then you do something like, hey man, you're not so bad. Here's how I'm fucked up. And then, oh, look, we feel closer because we have skin in the game and there's an understanding. And I think that is the dynamic that happens with especially individuals serving in the military, just as you described, your battle buddy you felt closer to because maybe you were convinced that you could share things and then there was not going to be judgment coming right away. You'd already solved the judgment thing. You knew this is an in-group, you're on my team.
Yeah.
And that is far less clear in romantic relationships.
I think that's probably the biggest problem with relationships is people don't look at it as a team.
Yeah. You know, well, and
some do, but
and there are things like within the red pill that they're not completely wrong. It's a data packet, not a prescription.
And this is,
you know,
I'm going to talk about something that Marines do, and I know the other services do it. Dudes who come into work and trash their wives, and I never wanted to be that guy.
Yeah.
But I've seen a bunch of them do it.
Yeah.
Oh, my wife is just nagging me about this and this, and it's like,
you picked her, I didn't.
Right.
Fix it. You know? No, and I think that's you're reminding me of something that I put forward to my clients a lot, which is be careful practicing what you don't want to get better at.
Yeah.
The brain, it is where judgments happen, but it's a very non-judgmental organ when you think about it. Because like, oh, I enjoy crack cocaine.
Let's do that.
Look at that. And then watch my brain just help me be more efficient at doing that. And I'm going to find like the shortest bus route and walking strategy to go get it. Who has it at this market price that I think is fair and reasonable in my addled addiction. And it's just going to help you get more efficient towards this thing that we would all agree that is a fucking error, And so the idea being, yes, if you go into work and trash your wife every day, like be careful getting better at that.
Mhm.
Because it is a organization that it's not just work.
Yeah, it's a life.
The odds that your wife will have interfaces with these people are high. They're,
Not just family day.
right. And the odds that she'll hear something or they'll treat her in a way.
Yeah.
You got to be careful. But the marriage and, like I remember I had a shtick just as a young lieutenant when I was new at it, but I still kind of had a head for how people work. And I'd run afoul with distance relationships a couple of times at that point. And if I got a new guy checking in and we're having that, so why'd you join the Marine Corps conversation, with his new lieutenant boss, I'd be like, so you have a girl back home there, Devil Dog? Oh, yes, sir. Oh, that's great. That's great. When she breaks up with you, let me know. And if you're of age, the rank will come off as much as it can. We'll get a beer. If you're not of age, we'll get a Dr. Pepper, and then I will welcome you to the real Marine Corps.
There's a group that I'm a member of on Facebook called the Salty Veteran, and it's really funny. And they always post funny stuff, but they had an old leave request from like the 1940s, and they posted, "Hey, this was my grandpa's leave request. I find it really funny." And he said his leave request was, "I just got married. We plan on getting pregnant. I'd like to be there when it happens."
I mean, I think my first, I won't say it's my first education in that, but just as one who enjoys watching the human condition play out, there I am in Okinawa. It's an island in, subtropical island, 10,000 dudes, all of whom are reasonably fit and employed, all healthy enough to be there in the first damn place and decently disease free. And
not when they leave.
well, yeah, you're not wrong. But the starting point is that, like they're going to get their shots and screenings before they can arrive at least. If there was a subtropical island like that, just lopted, like, oh, it's 10,000 women in the same condition, there would be flights around the clock of guys coming to go and shoot their shot with that. Was there any flights like this of people coming to this subtropical paradise full of fit, healthy males? No. So like the education came on early of like, oh yeah, there's some different stuff between us here. And we bring that into our relationships. I don't have
Cooking with TC is late. Did we actually schedule one? Because I don't remember. We talked about it, but we didn't actually schedule it.
Georgie wants her chicken Kiev.
She got a long trip to get here for it, and I'm not holding it. So,
I have a question. Do you feel that for veterans, at least, that feel that they have PTSD, should they go to the VA for help, or should they seek outside resources?
I do think that if you can just get through the administrative stuff to an actual clinician, I do like the way that the VA treats PTSD once you're there, or at least the theories behind it. I mean, obviously there's variability across clinicians, just like there's better and worse military members that all get the same training, and yet, oh, look, some of these people, the rule of the 10% of this platoon, they suck. They all had the same training. They all went on the same rifle range. And so too it can be with training in how to help people with PTSD. But the VA does use what I understand to be the kind of the big three in approaching and trying to treat it.
Mhm.
You can count on being offered exposure therapy. You can count on being offered EMDR, and you can probably count on being offered cognitive processing therapy, and that's the one that I'm certified in.
Mhm.
I like cognitive processing therapy, so I'll admit my bias on that. It does have, I think, elements of exposure in it, but these are the things that I think this is our best shot at resolving PTSD as such.
Mhm.
Because when we think about what a trauma is, you're moving through life and you have a map that you're using to navigate life itself. You're actually not interacting with the world directly per se.
Mhm.
You're mostly just checking in with it to see, does it still match the map? Because you're not paying it to, like, if you go use the restroom and the floor just keeps flooring, you're not going to be like, oh, I have to I really should be paying attention to. No, you're not. It's still matching your understanding of how it should work. So we're not making any updates with that. And usually with trauma, something has blown out somebody's map.
Mhm.
And now that is such a rupture that now comes I used to think that this was a safe thing I could do, and it damn near killed me,
Mhm.
or it killed somebody else and I saw it,
Mhm.
or it completely ruined my life. This is one of the issues that I take with the definition of trauma, in the limiting of scope to only things that could have medically killed you or did kill somebody else or who are a sexual assault. This is kind of theory stuff that I disagree with. And I actually liked a Petersonian model for this, that it's more like, look, if something happened and 6 months later, you're still thinking about it more days than not,
Mhm.
that was probably a trauma.
Yeah.
And that's why when, you mention marriage and its dissolution and after effects, you had an idea of this is how it should work.
Mhm.
I should be able to relax around you. This should be cooperative, so on and so. And then when that gets blown out, then portions of your moral sense of the world get blown out. And I think also the sense of like, well, wait a minute, but I also picked this person. And so it's like, what is the difference between my life and my livelihood?
Mhm.
I think that's a lot blurrier. But then at the same time, the VA has its hand in offering compensation. So if we just offered everybody who, I say we, I'm not with the VA, but where do we draw a line for sober and judicious spending of tax dollars towards supplementing somebody's life who had a trauma? I wouldn't want to be in that business necessarily. It's like, how do I make you better, but then also make sure you have an incentive to never get better?
And I think that's a big reason why PTSD is now considered a presumptive condition. Like if you apply for it, you're going to get it. Just what level you're going to get it is going to be upon, your CMP exam.
Yeah.
I want to say something real quick too to what you said, AVA. Don't dwell on the idea of I think I have PTSD. Because that starts to delve into the largest problem that we see in the mental health world now, by and large, is people starting off with, I think I have this. Then they go into confirmation bias where they read up on that particular topic of whatever they think they have. And then they begin to self-diagnose. And then they walk in and they say, hey, I've got PTSD. And they're really, without any intention, are very good at ultimately living out that diagnosis in front of a therapist. And the therapist is not seeing you on a regular basis, in your home and whatnot. And Kevin, you said something too about the financial repercussions of keeping people in the system. And the paycheck aspect. I have a really good friend. He's a phenomenal clinical psychologist and their therapist. His name is Jake Wiskerson, and he has a clinic up in Sparks, Nevada, Zephyr Wellness. And his stated goal is to work himself and his on staff full-time therapist and his practicums is to build in their minds a desire to work themselves out of business.
Yes. Yeah.
And
No, I like that a lot. I say a very similar thing, just a little bit differently. I see it as almost like a wild animal rescue. I don't want to make it so that this is the only place you can survive. The goal is, let's get you back out there so you can fly again under your own steam, and that's that. I don't love the forever client or forever patient kind of model. As best we can. There was one more thing. Go ahead.
No, I think that's one of the symptoms of mental health, and the way we address it is you've got a segment of people out there who are like, well, I don't even believe mental health is a problem because you can't see it.
Sure.
And it's in the brain, it's in the mind. And how do you verify that? And I'm like, well, you can't see cancer, right? Like, well, unless the person has, well, if you look like Skipper, you can tell this.
I know the history of psychology.
But you can't always see something that a person's diagnosed with.
Right.
And at the same time, a lot of people approach their mental health issues as if it's you're stuck with this for reality, for eternity. Like I can never get better.
Yes.
And very rarely will you ever see me side with that perspective unless we're dealing very specifically with cluster B personality disorders. Cluster B personality disorders are almost insurmountable in the sense of you're never getting rid of that. But somebody even with PTSD, and I don't know what your position on CPTSD is, I've seen enough to understand what the differences between complex post-traumatic stress and actual, what people consider as post-traumatic stress.
Sure.
They're similar but different. But even those can be worked through and therapeutically dealt with to a place where a person doesn't have to dwell in that diagnosis for the rest of their life once the diagnosis is there. And I think that's one of the things that fails a lot of people, is that they do get wrapped up in a system where, oh, you've got to keep coming. You've got to have this medication for the rest of your life, or you have to have this very particular therapeutic approach for the rest of your life. A good therapist is going to be working a person towards being their own source of healing.
Yes. No, it's almost like an indicator that I know somebody's they're showing the first signs of, hey, maybe now it's time to start just coming every other week, is when they start sounding like their own therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And you can hear kind of the development of different ways of looking at their own tragedy that played out in their own life.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, what I think we're also talking about here, and I'm glad that you circled back around on it, is the idea of people who become fused with their diagnosis, almost like the Marine that's like, I was a Marine, or you have people that will come and be like, I'm neurodivergent. It's like, what? I mean, you found your way to the office. Like,
Sure,
or I'm.
And I would like to also say, I believe that Marines should be in the DSM.
It's fair.
I do want to make sure we get to ATL Transparency's question here. How can the VA treat if the VA is not accountable for their actions successfully? And he does have a follow-on that says, before you go in deep into the process, again, how can you get help from a person or group without any accountability?
Well, I don't know. Like, I would never be the person that says even with all the experience that I have of talking to people that have had struggles with the VA, whether it be for the medical care or the mental health, that when I say I'm not trying to separate medical, because mental health is a medical concern, but as many problems as the VA has, and everybody knows on this channel how much we understand that, there are still individuals who care.
Yeah.
There are still individuals there who
Well-
do care, and they are working from the inside. We had Katie Eilers on a few weeks ago, and Katie
Mhm.
has a long list of people in the Omaha VA who are whistleblowers.
Yeah.
They are fighting to make changes. There are people on the inside that are fighting to make changes. It doesn't mean that every single person inside the VA is corrupt.
And I got some of the best advice in my first 6 months out of the military. A fellow veteran, old salty guy, said, "If you don't give up and you don't die, eventually the VA is going to give you everything that you rate. They're just going to be a pain in the ass, and it's going to be red tape."
Yeah. And has that borne itself out in your life?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm now 100% disabled. Had to fight for that. I now
could've
have
helped you with that
had
a
my
long time
current
ago.
therapist for 3 years,
Hmm.
and I would say the two of us have been very successful. But it took a lot of times of doctor for 6 months. Oh, hey, they're out of the system. We're gonna get you a new one.
Yeah.
Wait 2 months, get a new one. 6
Yeah.
months. I had to go through that process.
Right. Well, and I do
We had to
think
try meds.
Yeah, because without knowing exactly the way an individual brain will interact with a particular dosimetry and combination of medications, that's something that will be trial and error because we're not there yet. We understand what it does generally to brains and this kind of stuff, but how yours will work,
Mhm.
jump ball still.
Yeah.
And then speaking to the accountability piece, I think we do well to be specific about what do we mean by any accountability.
Like when they abuse veteran.
Sure, but I mean, like, in like, I can't treat abuse. I can intervene on an individual case of abuse.
Mhm.
And then you marshal the powers that be to address that thing, and then hopefully root out bad actors, and then establish, if there was a policy that allowed for it to go as long as it did, maybe there's something different we can do better.
Well, I would say, an AVA, you're a perfect example. You've been victimized by the VA, but yet you keep fighting. Like a lot of veterans I know, they'll be like, "Oh, I'm never going back there again," and they just detach. You still are fighting. You built your channel about the abuse that you've done, so you're going through it. I built this channel because I could see what was happening to me, and I was experiencing it, and I wanted the public to know. So, I think you and I going through this, by not giving up, by keeping talking about it, by bringing it to Congress's attention, which we have and we will continue to do because we've done petitions, we've done form letters. You know, that all I think is a step. We're fighting a very big bureaucracy, and
Yeah.
so we're gonna be short on ammo and low on time. So as long as we acknowledge that, and for those of us, as the biggest problem I have with veterans is when we get into internal fighting over stupid shit. Like when I had veterans coming after me doing this show, coming after me for stolen valor, saying I didn't really serve in Afghanistan when I posted the pictures of me in Afghanistan. Like, you can look at the metadata as to where this was taken. And but yeah, that we all have our ranks have mental illness, and that distracts us so much. So and then you talk about the VA. They have an interest in keeping their jobs. The VFW, the American Legion, they have an interest in keeping their roles. And we get too protective of those things. Like,
Skipper, hold your thought for a second. I want to address ATL right now.
sure.
No one here is advocating that it not be reported. Like literally, I know that you do not tune in to the channel. I think you're probably here through AVA's channel. The entire thing that we're talking about right now is predominantly mental health, especially within the veteran community. But no one on this channel advocates that no one ever report. In fact, we go so far to the other degree that we tell people to report everything.
Yeah.
And I can hear, if you will, ATL, in your responses, there is some trauma that you're dealing with, and I'm gonna guess a lot of it has to do with the VA.
Mhm.
And we would encourage you to reach out to Skipper or I through AVA or however, and talk to us, but you're being incredibly argumentative in saying things that no one is saying. Kevin worked as an intern for a year at the VA. I've never worked. No, it's not a deflection. It's not a deflection. We're making a statement that it's a very long process to change the VA. My solution is never going to happen as much as I'd like it to, which is disbanding the VA so that you have to go out and get the care, or that you can go out and get the care from the private sector without having to go through the VA. We'd all be better off with that. But right now we have the system that we have, and we do have to work through it. And no one here is advocating that it not be changed. And no one here is advocating that no one report.
Oh, we encourage everybody to report and give us a copy of it and let us FOIA it, because
and we have a
want
long-standing history of calling on people inside the VA to reach out to us, even if it's privately, and we will tell your stories anonymously to protect you while you're in the system, which is what you would do respectfully for a whistleblower. But we're not deflecting. We're literally sitting here trying to talk about how to help veterans with mental health issues. And if a veteran feels like they're in the VA system and they can get the help that they want, telling them that they're not going to get help because there's no accountability isn't going to help that veteran. It's not going to help that veteran, because a lot of veterans won't go privately because they don't have answers. They don't have other options because they don't believe they do. And quite frankly, mental health care especially is so exorbitantly expensive for people that they literally can't afford to go anywhere else. They have to go where it's free, so to speak. And so if you want to come on and talk about your case and your story, we'd love to have you on, ATL.
Mhm.
Obviously you have a channel, so you're not going to be afraid to do a show. So come on our show and talk about your stuff. That's not, Kevin didn't say he wouldn't report for privacy. That's not what he said. He said that he has concerns about privacy. And I will flat out fucking tell you that there are people who have had their records revealed to the public, not only because they reported, but somebody inside the clinic backed them up and they released the records publicly. So don't tell me that doesn't happen. That's what Kevin was addressing.
Yeah, and if there's been a clear breach of, like, somebody has been harmed, then this does get reported, and there's a pathway for that. I'm talking about the things that are far more murky, and when somebody feels they haven't been served, then I'm loath to break their confidentiality that they've trusted me about. It would be kind of like somebody saying, like, hey, I have this concern about my buddy who was abused when he was younger, but he's 18 now. I don't go to the authorities to say, my client so-and-so told me because that's the information that would be needed to make it actionable to pursue it for this other person who's already reached the age of majority. And the assumption is that the person in front of me, unless they are inpatient or something like that, has autonomy.
Mhm.
You know, and I don't think, like, yes, this is the pathway, is not offering them a service. You know, like this would be the, like, yes, saying here is the IG and here is how and I will help you do this, you know,
Mhm.
which I do. You know, if somebody is in contention with their chain of command or something
Yeah.
like that, or they're in a legal bad way, it's like, I'm not a lawyer, but it sounds like you need a place to sort through this as you strategize how to unfuck your life, and I am happy to do that. But then if if somebody does say, like, oh, my therapist slept with me, then it's like, yes, now it's reportable and now it's actionable, and now we release that script, which is,
Yeah.
hey, this therapist is a bad actor, and it gets handled, you know.
And ATL, the VA has committed crimes against people on this panel as recently as this week. So we are not praising the VA at all. We are absolutely critics of the VA, but we want to make sure that we are also effective, I guess I'd say.
I in response to, and I want to move on, and I want to address this real quick with Georgie and
Yeah.
Kevin and I. Hopefully, we can piggyback on this.
Mhm.
But then I know we got a couple of lighter things that Skipper wants to talk about, so I can shoot them down. Can either of you explain to me the difference between complex post-traumatic stress disorder and regular post-traumatic stress disorder? I had one therapist diagnose me with CPTSD, and the current said it was just PTSD. So what's the difference? Predominantly, the difference between them is your therapist. It honestly, and whether or not they use the DSM or what's the there's another diagnostic manual out there that's gaining widespread use now, and it does contain CPTSD. The DSM does not have
CPTSD in it.
CPTSD in it, and so therapists who are dependent on the DSM alone, for whatever reasons, will not use the phrase CPTSD. Therapists who are branched into the two different main diagnostic manuals will use CPTSD and PTSD, but they will not use them interchangeably, because CPTSD has a tendency, not in every case, but it has a tendency to be rooted first in a condition that's referred to as ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And adverse childhood experiences gives rise to complex post-traumatic stress. So a person, or male, female, whatever, an individual who at a very young age is faced with certain things: violence in the home, chemically dependent parent, child neglect, narcissistic abuse, borderline personality abuse. A child who's experiencing these things on a regular basis first starts off, they look at their ACE score, and then after their ACE score, you hit so many points. I think it's 5 out of like 10. No, it's more like 4 out of like 10 different ACE scores. Then they begin to look at that individual and say, okay, how did that score impact this individual, and how long did the abuse go on? The earlier it starts in your life, the longer the abuse goes on. The longer the abuse goes on, the more likely you are to be diagnosed or be seen to have developed complex post-traumatic stress, because it's not a one-time issue. You can develop PTSD from a one-time issue.
Mhm.
Complex post-traumatic stress is a one-time issue that then turns into a two-time issue, into a three-time issue, and a four-time issue, and it's not the exact same experience every time. And that has a way of wiring the brain differently than just pure PTSD does.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head in the DSM-5, which is my primary reference for diagnosing. And that, yes, I do think there is a distinction between what occurs and predisposes an individual for later traumas that trace back to their first experiences when they were on the planet, and that has always been something, even probably before we started calling it complex PTSD, as if to say that there's like, oh, but there's simple PTSD. Like, no, we would never say that that's like a simple phenomenon. But that's also, even in the case of complex PTSD, a modality like cognitive processing therapy is going to target the worst of the worst, so that if it works and the skills start to help improve the way in which you're able to navigate the world and maybe feel more confident, less like you have to only get groceries at 2 a.m. when there's nobody there so that you don't have to be in crowds. If you start to see yourself able to re-enter life, that it's almost that there's no better evidence that, oh yes, targeting the worst thing that ever happened to you that had the greatest impacts upon your life, and then if it worked there, then you've learned that this can work for the others too.
Mhm.
And so that's why we target the biggest trauma that ever occurred, because rare is the individual where it's like, one thing happened and now I'm ruined. It's like, this happened, this happened, this happened. These have been the impacts on my life. It means that I can't develop relationships. I can't leave the house. I can't drive, whatever. I don't trust people anymore. And so I do think that the thing that helps the one is target that hardest thing,
Mhm.
And then watch yourself apply the skills across all the other things that happen to you.
Which is why EMDR has been such a phenomenal treatment tool for people with both PTSD and complex post-traumatic stress disorder, because it goes in and it targets an area of concern and it allows you to address that area, but then it moves into targeting other areas as well.
Yeah.
And she says from 6 to 18, she had trauma with their step parents and then went through domestic violence at 27.
Mm-hmm.
The domestic violence at 27, do not hear me blaming shaming the victim or victim blaming here, but the domestic violence at 27 was the end, or not the end, but was an outcome of 12 years of repeated abuse under your step parents. This is not, obviously I can't diagnose. So, but you are set up to be in a position after 12 years of constant, whether it was narcissistic abuse or whatever kind of abuse it was, you're in a position to find yourself susceptible to being taken in by somebody who's going to abuse you.
Mhm. Yeah,
You're wired that way. And it takes a lot to recognize it and not go down that road. And a lot of people don't have those tools on board.
Well, we need to start wrapping things up. Is there any books or anything that, or anything for anyone watching that you recommend? I know I'm throwing stuff at you.
Yeah. One of the things, and I'll try not to doorknob us as we're trying to wrap up, but I do think that it's interesting that many of the modalities of today, whether we're discussing cognitive behavioral therapy or acceptance and commitment therapy, any of the third wave therapies that have come along, and this was something that I picked up on when I was still in school, is they a lot of it's just rooted in Stoicism and Buddhism.
Mhm.
And the middle path kind of doctrines of life.
I believe in magic rocks, so that's why I got my crystals.
Careful, or I'll go all Jordan Peterson on and be like, "What do you mean
And
by believe?"
If you need to buy essential oils, you can join my MLM.
Yeah, but I think there's nothing wrong with going back to the source. These are ideas that helped people navigate a world that was at least as fucking dangerous as the one that we're in right now.
Mhm.
And these old ideas, if a lot of Stoicism is my good. I used to troll my colleagues, and I've told you this before, but for those who haven't heard it, psychologists fall in like with their little flavor of the month, innovator who's making a name for themselves, and so they find some quote from Stephen Hayes or Aaron Beck and be like, "Oh yeah, everybody likes that on our little, cohort Facebook page at the time. So I would just put up like old Stoic quotes, and then I would attribute it to somebody like Stephen Hayes or one of the other innovators in psychology. And then I'd watch them put their little heart emojis on there. I'd be like, actually, that was said 2,000 years ago by like some white guy, piss them off. And
That was Socrates.
Exactly.
Epictetus.
Right. And so it's like, well, if these ideas work for an emperor,
Mhm.
The man who had to work under Caligula and then Nero. So like we think, oh yeah, I have a high stress job in my cubicle. Right, but you didn't fucking work for Nero, who could just look at you and be like, you die, right? And if it worked for a slave, then maybe there's something about these idea sets that work.
Mhm.
And I think if people can find a modality, even if it's, all this stuff can be found on YouTube, the Enchiridion,
Meditations.
meditations, letters to Lucilius. I think that, spend some time with those when you're on the treadmill or something like that, or going for your walk, and see if something doesn't stand out that's of use to you.
I would recommend a book by Dr. Christian Conti called Walking Through Anger. It is a phenomenal book, and he's actually a Buddhist. And I'm not, but his approach to dealing with mental health is to get to the root of what it is for a lot of people. And that is the anger issue. What you'll see with just about anybody who has a strong mental health concerns, depression, anxiety, no matter what version of depression, PTSD, there's a lot of anger that comes with that, and it really helps you to take a step back and breathe. That's not one of the methods, but it helps you take a step back and kind of breathe and go, okay, what's actually happening here? Why is this bothering me? And it's a phenomenal book. I digested it, and I actually had Dr. Conti on my show as well. So, I think that's a very, very good book. And if you do tend to lean towards the Zen Buddhist style or philosophy, you can really relate to Dr. Conti. But
And I hope today won't be the last time that Dr. Kevin joins us. I'd like to have him back on again because I really enjoyed this discussion.
well, just don't let him out of your house.
Where the magic happens here in this bedroom.
No one wanted to hear that or have that image in their head.
Oh.
Especially when we know how close the two of you are sitting together right now.
And you guys can't see me on camera, but Lacey the blow up doll's right behind me.
Right.
Wearing her Veteran Nation merchandise, which you can get at veterannationfoundation.com.
I got
Just three-way.
Right. Happy Father's Day to all the dads. And second, I got a book that I'd like to recommend. I don't know the author of it, but it's called The Body Keeps the Score. It's opened my eyes to a lot of things as far as therapeutic wise. So if you get the chance, check that book out.
There's also a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And it's actually a lot deeper than the title would let on, but it's all of those, that and Walking on Eggshells.
Walking on Eggshells is good.
My book recommendation is The Turner Diaries.
All books that I have read
Someone's
in my
laughing
walk,
at that.
in my walk through my mental health concerns. And stay away from Skipper as much as possible, because if you don't have PTSD, one show with him.
I know we're closing, but it reminds me of a book recommendation I made to a client that I had one time when I was over at the Morongo Healthcare District for practicum. Person was almost pathologically agreeable. Had a story that is sounding like what one of the commenters, maybe Georgia, has offered in the chat, of long history of inviting individuals that were just there to prey upon her into her life. So we went and got a copy of the 48 Laws of Power, and which is a treatise on kind of distilled Machiavellianism. And I was like, look, I'm not saying become this, but you need to account for the fact that there are these people in the world that are playing by this rule book.
Yeah.
you know, as you navigate through life. And I know you can't relate to it, and you can't imagine that. Why would anybody do this? And maybe if you just explain to people why you are the way you are, then they would offer you the sympathy that you just baseline offer. And it's like, no, they're gonna eat you and like it.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, folks. We are going to wrap this up. We have to get going. Make sure in the description are links to both TC and AVA. Make sure you are subscribing to both of them, as well as sign our petition. We have a petition for the Second Amendment rights for veterans, because the VA is trying to take away veterans' Second Amendment rights, and there is a bill, HB 705. We're trying to get Congress to pass it.
I just want to know what subscribering is. But anyway, that's for next.
Subscribing.
He's a wordsmith.
Yeah. He just
Uh-huh.
goes with it.
That's right.
Get us
All
out of
right,
here.
folks. Anything you
I
guys are
think-
plugging before we go?
Go watch my technical difficulty laden conversation with Bailey from this morning. The poor family's being run through the ringer and abused by the system as their beloved brother and son Blake is paralyzed from the neck down, and the Minnesota State Patrol and the sheriff's office that was responsible for investigating it are dragging their feet as much as possible to cover up the troopers' involvement in trying to kill him. So it's an uplifting show you should watch.
Sounds like a hoot.
Well, now.
All right, folks, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all your questions, comments. Still keep sending them to us, and we'll try to talk Dr. Kevin into coming back and maybe, doing some live therapy on us. And everyone out there, as always, thank you for being worth serving.